Let's start with our next section, factories came up in India. In this part, we are going to deal with the early entrepreneurs and where did the workers come from. Okay, now can you tell me where did the first factory come up? Where did the East Indian Company set up its first factory? Was it on the eastern coast or was it on the western coast? Well, the answer is British tried to set up their first factory on the west coast. In 1608, when Captain Hawkins, representing East Indian Company, reached India and met Jahangir to talk about setting up factory in Surat, initially they were received well and later were expelled from the court mainly due to the presence of Portuguese influence in the court. So now East India Company travelled towards the south, towards the eastern coast and set up their first factory in Masulipattnam, located in present-day Andhra Pradesh, with the permission of the Golconda Bahamani ruler where there was no Mughal influence. British realized that only way to increase their extent in India is to decrease the influence of the Portuguese, which they successfully did in Surat in 1612 and 1614, and Jahangir was impressed with their naval superiority over Portuguese, and later in 1615 he granted the royal firman to trade and establish factories all over the Mughal Empire. This is when the first factory on the western coast came up in Surat. The first cotton mill in Bombay came up in 1854 and it went into production 2 years later. By 1862, 4 mills were at work with 94,000 spindle and 2,150 looms. Around the same time, jute mills came up in Bengal. But the first one was set up in 1855 and another one 7 years later in 1862. In North India, Elgin Mills was started in Kanpur in 1860 and a year later the first cotton mill of Ahmedabad was set up, that is 1861. By 1874, the first spinning and weaving mill of Madras began its production. Let me tell you a short story about the first cotton mill and the jute mills. The first Indian cotton mill was going to be established in 1818 at Fort Gloucester near Calcutta, but the mill was a failure. So now when we had mentioned earlier that the first cotton mill came in Mumbai in 1854, it was successfully established by KGN Dabir. It was the foundation of modern cotton industry in India. Its name was Bombay Spinning and Weaving Company. The Auckland Mill was the first jute mill established in India. This mill was established in 1855 by British entrepreneur George Auckland with the help of a Bengali financier Babu Baisumbar Sen in Rishra in Bengal Presidency in British India. Current day, it is in West Bengal. George Auckland, an English entrepreneur who was also a coffee plantation owner and a former Marine in East Indian Company, he initially had the idea to grow rhea grass. It is a fiber crop which is principally used for fabric production. He had the idea to grow rhea grass to serve it as a substitute for flax and hemp. As this supply of flax and hemp was interrupted by a Crimean War from the Russian Empire to Britain, which enabled the Bengal jute trade to permanently take the place of the flax and the hemp seeds, or the hemp supply. It was one of his friend John Kerr, a machine manufacturer, who actually advised Auckland to manufacture jute products in Bengal instead of growing rhea grass. So by the middle of the 19th century, Bengal exported large quantities of raw jute to supply flax industry in Dundee in present-day United Kingdom. The first Indian jute mill, remember children, the first Indian jute mill came up in Calcutta in 1917 and it was established by Sir Seth Hukumchand. So now, before I move on to the next slide, I would advise you to go through all the years which have been highlighted on the slide and the event or the factories which were established during this time. From the late 18th century, British in India began exporting opium to China and took tea from China to England. Many Indians became junior players in this trade, providing finance, procuring supplies, and shipping consignments. Having earned through trade, some of these businessmen had a vision of developing India's industrial enterprise in India. Let us look at some early entrepreneurs, Indian entrepreneurs in India. First one is Dwarkanath Tagore. In Bengal, he made his fortune by trade with China. Second one are the Parsi businessmen who had settled their business, established their business in Bombay, Dinshaw Petit and Jamshedji Nusarwanji Tata, who built huge industrial empire in our country. Next one is a Marwari businessman, Seth Hukumchand, who first established Indian jute mill in Calcutta. He also traded with China. There were few merchants from Madras who also traded with Burma, while others had link with Middle East and East Africa. The father as well as the grandfather of G.D. Birla was also one of the noted and famous industrialists in our country in those days. Jamshedji Nusarwanji Tata was an Indian pioneer industrialist who founded the Tata Groups. He founded what later became the Tata Group of companies. Tata is regarded as the father of the Indian industry. He was so influential in the world of industry that Jawaharlal Nehru referred to him as one-man planning commission. He is also known as one of the most important builders of the modern Indian economy. Let me tell you short stories or facts about these noted industrialists. Sir Dinshaw Mackenzie Petit was a Parsi entrepreneur and founder of the first textile mills in India. He was the grandfather of Ratanbai Petit. Who was Ratanbai Petit? She was wife of the founder of Pakistan, Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Yes, you heard me right. Dinshaw Mackenzie Petit was born in Bombay. In the initial part of his career, he was a broker to European firm and gained a large fortune during the period of American Civil War. He was the founder of spinning and weaving mills. Let's talk about the next industrialist, Dwarkanath Tagore. He was one of the first Indian industrialists and an entrepreneur. He has done a notable work and has a substantial contribution to the Bengal Renaissance. Dwarkanath Tagore was well versed in languages like English, Bengali, Arabic, Farsi, and also in legal matters. He quickly realized the opportunity of enormous income to increase the family wealth through translation jobs of property wills and other official documents. Tagore was Western educated Bengali Brahmin and an acknowledged civil leader of Kolkata, who played a pioneering role in setting up strings of commercial ventures like banking, insurance, and shipping companies in partnership with British traders. Next noted industrialist was Sir Seth Hukumchand of Indore. He belonged to the Holkar state. His ancestors had settled at Indore under the patronage of ruling Holkar Maratha clan. He was a pioneer in Swadeshi industry and was also a part of the Khadi movement initiated by Mahatma Gandhi in 1920. His family still resides in Indore in the Grand Palace, Indra Bhavan, popularly known as Hukumchand Ghanta Ghar. Now let us move on to the next slide. As colonial control over Indian trade tightened, the space within which Indian merchants could function became increasingly limited. They were barred from trading with Europe in manufacturing goods and had to export mostly raw materials and food grains, raw cotton, opium, wheat, and indigo as required by the British. They were also gradually edged out of the shipping business. So, do you understand what points you have to remember over here? That the colonial control over Indian trade tightened, they were barred from trading with Europe in manufactured goods, and they had to export mostly raw materials and food grains. Which were these raw materials? Cotton, opium, wheat, and indigo, and they were gradually edged out, removed out of the shipping business too. Till the First World War, European managing agencies controlled a large sector of Indian industrialists. Three of the biggest ones were Bird Helger and Company, Andrew Yule, and Jardine Skinner and Company. These agencies mobilized capital, set up joint stock companies, and managed them. In most instances, Indian financiers provided the capital while European managing agencies made all investments and took all the business decisions. The European merchant industrialists had their own chamber of commerce while Indian businessmen were not allowed to join. So, what are the points that we have to remember over here? What happened during the First World War? Who took care of the large sector of the Indian industries? So, it was the European managing agencies. Those were the noted three ones: Jardine and Skinner, Andrew Yule, and Bird Helger. These agencies, they mobilized capital, set up joint stock companies, and they managed them. Indian financiers were the ones who were providing capital, and these managing agencies would invest them and take all the decisions. Indian financiers did not have the right to take decisions. And the last point is that the European merchants had their own chamber of commerce, while Indian businessmen were not allowed to join. What is Chamber of Commerce? It's a local association to promote and protect the interest of the business community in a particular place. So, in this Chamber of Commerce, Indian businessmen were not at all allowed. Today, Chamber of Commerce India, or ICC as it is popularly known, is the premier body of business and industry in eastern and northeastern India. The membership of the chamber comprises several of the largest corporate groups in the country, with business operations all over the country and abroad. These are the logos of Chamber of Commerce. On the extreme left is the Indian Chamber of Commerce. Then below it is the Maharashtra Chamber of Commerce. And then on the right it is the Bombay Chamber of Commerce. Now let's move our attention to the next slide. Where did these workers come from? Factories needed workers. With the expansion of factories, their demand increased. In most industrial regions, workers came from the districts around. Peasants and artisans who found no work in the village went to the industrial centers in search of work. Now over here you can see that there is a similar situation in the British colony, that is in India, as it was in England. Over 50% workers in Bombay cotton industry in 1911 came from the neighboring districts of Ratnagiri, while mills of Kanpur got most of their textiles from villages within the districts of Kanpur. Most often, mill workers moved between village and city, returning to their village home only during harvest and festivals. Even today, most of the workers who work in cities and towns travel back to their villages during the festival time and during the harvest time. If you happen to actually have a word with the maid who comes to your home to work, to cook, she can also tell you the same thing, that she goes back to her village to help out her family members who are working on the field in the rural section during the harvest time. And most of the painters in our city who come from Banaras or Varanasi, they usually travel back to their place, to their state rather, when during the festival time. As the news of employment spread, workers traveled a great distance in the hope of work in the mills. For instance, they traveled from various provinces to work in the textile mills of Bombay and in the jute mills of Calcutta. Now, once they reached the towns, it was absolutely difficult for a worker, for a peasant to get jobs. Why? Because jobs were limited and the population which was traveling from the countryside to towns, from rural section to towns to get the job were in huge numbers. So it was difficult for them to get jobs even when mills multiplied and the demands for workers increased. The number seeking work were always more than the jobs available. Entry into these mills was restricted. Industrialists usually employed a jobber to get new recruits. Very often, this jobber was an old and trusted worker. He got people from his villages, ensured them jobs, helped them to settle in the city, and provided them money in time of crisis. Jobber therefore became a person with some authority and power. He became more demanding and he started demanding money and gifts for his favor and controlling the lives of the workers. So, can I say over here that there was some sort of corruption involved at this particular stage, which is also there even today in most of the agencies, in most of the industry? That is, in, if I be very specific, can be in most of the government offices, right? For example, this jobber usually would take people from his village. So it was not based upon the skill of that person. It was usually depending upon his relation with that jobber. Correct? Or other scenario is, if he would offer him more money, then definitely jobber is going to allot work to him. So over time, the number of factory workers increased, but still, it was only a small proportion of the total industrial workforce which was present in our colony in India during that time. Revise our points again. Industrialist employed a jobber. He was a person with some authority and power. He was an old and trusted worker. And he got people from his village. He ensured them job, helped them settle in the city, provide them money in times of crisis. He was controlling the lives of the workers and he started demanding money and gifts for his favor in order to get or give all the workers jobs in industries. Let's bring our attention to the economic condition of our country when Britishers were ruling upon us. Well, before the Britishers came to India or during the pre-British period, the problem of stagnation, poverty and backwardness of the Indian economy was not so acute. But with the advent of the British in India, the economic structure in India had to face a lot of change. Self-sufficient economy of the villages in India had to face a ruin, and economic exploitation of the country was initiated with it. During the first period of 100 years, British did take away huge amount of resources from India. During this period, cottage industries in India were totally destroyed due to the colonial strategy followed by the British rulers. Students, we now come to the end of this part. I'm going to remind you again that you have to read this section, this part One more time, read the sources, especially source E and F from this section, as it is asked in the exam most of the time as a part of an example or a direct question itself. Do go and watch the video which is there on the last slide of this section.
Navsari, a small town in present-day Gujarat, was for centuries home to Parsis of the priestly class. Who kept alight the sacred fire and preserved a tradition of asceticism. Of the several families that stayed there, one Bairam adopted the name Tata, which literally meant one who is hot-tempered. In the year 1839, on the 3rd of March, a boy was born into the family who was named Jamsetji Nasirwanji Tata. The boy was initiated into the various rites of his religion. He served his novitiate, and his name was inscribed among the priestly records. When he was 13, his father took him to Bombay and admitted him to the Elphinstone Institution. In the year 1856, Jamsetji joined the Elphinstone College, where he received a liberal education and acquired a love for reading, which lasted throughout his life. While still a student at the college, Jamsetji had a narrow escape from death. His study in his home was in an attic tower, very close to a rattling tile roof. During one terrific cyclone, his father rushed up from the floor below, insisting that Jamsetji leave the house. The son obeyed and came down to the street filled with an excited and shrieking crowd. Suddenly, the nook he had occupied was torn away by the force of the wind and came crashing down at his feet. In 1858, Jamsetji Tata passed out as a Green Scholar from the Elphinstone College, then the equivalent of a degree. He had intended to follow one of the learned professions and entered for a time a solicitor's office. But, fortunately for Indian industry, necessity compelled him to go into business. In 1859, Jamsetji entered his father's firm, Nasirwanji and Kalyan Das. By his mid-30s, Jamsetji had acquired a fair degree of wealth and a reputation of being a canny businessman. He was planning a major investment in textiles and chose Nagpur to set up a mill, to the dismay of many who felt Bombay was the obvious choice. But Jamsetji knew Nagpur had easy reach to raw cotton, was amidst a profitable market, and both coal and water were abundantly available. He struck a good bargain for a piece of marshy 10-acre land from the Raja of Nagpur and filled it up with earth to start operations. A local banker who had refused to invest in the mill later said, Mr. Tata had put earth into the ground and taken out gold. On the 1st of January 1877, the Empress Mills started operations. With the help of James Brooksby, the technical expert with the mill, he adopted the innovative ring frame technology even before it was extensively used in England. The move doubled the production, share values zoomed, and Jamsetji's reputation as an astute industrialist was firmly established. Jamsetji was a benevolent employer, and his ideas were well into the future. He offered his people shorter working hours, well-ventilated workspaces, good living conditions, performance incentives, provident fund, and gratuity long before they were made mandatory in India and the West. This stocky man with a gruff voice was full of wit and humor. He loved reading, and his library had books on literature, technology, philosophy, travel, glassware, porcelain. There was no ceiling, really. His knowledge was encyclopedic, and ideas flowed non-stop. Jamshedji loved an ingenious device and was a born pioneer. When the cinematograph first appeared, he acquired one at once. His carriages were the first to be fitted with rubber tires, whose silent progress amazed the crowd on the streets. As far back as 1901, he was seen driving a motor car in Bombay, which used to have frequent breakdowns, adding an element of adventure in the excursions. All his purchases were made not so much for himself as to let India know of the developments happening across the seas. Sir George King, chief curator of the Botanical Gardens in Calcutta, acknowledged after a chance meeting that he had actually learnt something on plants from Jamshedji. Jamshedji loved Bombay. The kindly face, the snow-white beard, and the Parsi pagadi were a familiar sight at the seafront, taking early morning walks. By the end of the 19th century, Bombay had started paying the price for heavy industrialization. Soot and grime from the textile mills were polluting the city. Jamshedji began working on a new project to supply hydroelectric power for a clean and smokeless city. Only 2 mill owners agreed to tap the power, but he still went ahead with it. What mattered to him most was that Bombay needed it. Once Jamshedji was invited to dine at a fine city hotel by a foreign friend. When he walked in with his host, he was accosted by a supercilious hotel manager with the infamous line, "We don't allow Indians in here." Jamshedji chose to reply carefully to this insult. He spent £3 lakh to build the Taj Mahal Hotel, one of the finest in the world. Many called it Tata's white elephant, but as far as he was concerned, Bombay needed a world-class hotel where Indians would be treated without discrimination. It was the first building in Bombay to be lit by electricity. Jamshedji's vision of philanthropy was almost radical. He believed that creating opportunities for people would help fight poverty. He felt it was important to support the talented and created a special fund to send students to go to England for higher studies. Later, these thoughts translated into his vision for the Indian Institute of Science. He left half his wealth, amounting to 30 lakh rupees, to set up the institution which opened its doors in 1904. Stalwarts like the Nobel winner Dr. C.V. Raman, Dr. Homi Bhabha, and Dr. Vikram Sarabhai have headed this formidable place of learning. Jamshedji was an insatiable traveler. Right from the day he entered the world of business, he traveled across the world in his quest for fulfillment of his ideas and his schemes. When he was traveling on a ship to the US once, he had a chance meeting with Swami Vivekananda, who ignited in him It was in a tiny lecture hall in Manchester in 1869 that Jamshedji heard Thomas Carlyle's fiery words. The nation which gains control of iron soon acquires the control of gold. From that moment onwards, the quest for iron and the search for the man who could help find it became an obsession with him. One late September he set sail for America, and after weeks of perseverance he arrived at the cluttered desk of one Charles Page Perrin, a globally acknowledged geologist and metallurgist. For a long time, the two gazed at each other in silence. "Are you Charles Page Perrin?" The metallurgist nodded. "At last, I've found the man I am looking for." Jamshedji's communication was precise. "I have spoken to Mr. Kennedy. He will build the steel plant wherever you advise, and I will foot the bill. Will you come to India with me?" Perrin was so dumbfounded, struck by the character, the force, the kindliness that radiated from Jamshedji's face, that all he could mutter was, "Yes, yes, I will go with you." It was tough going for Perrin in the harsh and demanding land, with temperatures soaring to 125 degrees, and man-eating tigers and rogue elephants as adversaries. His team eventually struck what could perhaps be 3 billion tons of iron ore in the hills of Guru Mahisani in the Chota Nagpur district, situated within 150 miles from Calcutta. Imagine building a city in a place like this 100 years ago. But Jamshedji dreamed of providing a better life to his people. He planned the city which is now known as Jamshedpur, down to the last detail. His instructions were clear. Be sure to lay wide streets, planted with shady trees, every other of a quick-growing variety. Be sure that there is plenty of place for lawns and gardens. Reserve large areas for football, hockey, and parks. Earmark areas for Hindu temples, Mohammedan mosques, and Christian churches. For 30 years of his life, Jamshedji had dreamt of an iron and steel plant. And just when the project was beginning to take shape, he passed away in Germany. Fortunately, men like his son Dorab ensured that the dream lived on. Tata Steel, Asia's first integrated steel company, came into being in 1907. At the confluence of the two rivers, Subarnarekha and Karkhai, in a village called Shakchi, about 2.5 miles from the station of Kali Mati on the Bengal-Nagpur Railway. Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of independent India, had observed, "When you have to give the lead in action, in ideas, a lead which does not fit in with the very climate of opinion, that is true courage, physical, mental or spiritual, call it what you like. And it is this type of courage and vision that Jamshedji Tata showed, and it is right that we should honor his memory and remember him as one of the big founders of modern India."